hammer slipped from my hand, clattering against the shed's splintered floor, and I froze as his shadow fell over me. My pulse thundered, not from the heat of the Georgia sun, but from the way his eyes, storm-gray and unyielding, pinned me in place. I'd spent 23 years building walls around my heart, but in that moment, I knew they were about to crumble. My name's Ethan Caldwell, and I'm nobody special, just a guy from Macon who fixes things. Broken fences, leaky roofs, dreams that never quite take shape. I'd been working odd jobs since high school, trying to outrun the feeling that I didn't belong. Not in this town, not in my family's brick ranch house with its faded shutters and unspoken rules. My dad's voice still echoed in my head. Be a man, Ethan. Don't give people reason to talk. But they talked anyway. Whispers followed me like shadows, especially after I turned down Sarah Mitchell's prom invite with a stammer and a lie. That summer of 2023, I was 23, scraping by on handyman gigs. The ad on Craigslist was simple. Need help fixing a shed. Cash paid. Call Jake. No last name, just a number and an address on the edge of town. I didn't think much of it. Another job, another paycheck. But when I pulled my rusted Ford into Jake Harper's driveway, something shifted. His house was a weathered Victorian, paint peeling like old skin, but the yard was alive with wildflowers, defiant in their chaos. And there he was, leaning against the porch railing, all sharp jawline and quiet intensity. Ethan. His voice was low, like he was testing the weight of my name. He was maybe 25, tall, with a blonde buzz cut and arms corded from work. White like me, but where I was wiry, he was solid, like he'd been carved from the oak trees lining his property. I nodded, suddenly aware of the sweat sticking my t-shirt to my back. Jake, I managed, stepping out of the truck. He gave a small smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes but still made my chest tighten. He led me to the shed, a rickety thing that looked one storm away from collapse. Needs new boards, maybe a roof patch, he said, tossing me a hammer. You good with your hands? I caught the hammer, my fingers brushing his. A jolt ran through me, sharp and unfamiliar. Yeah, I said too quickly. I'm good. We worked in silence at first, the kind that wasn't awkward but heavy, like we were both waiting for something to break. I measured boards, he sawed. I nailed, he held. The sun climbed higher, and sweat dripped into my eyes. Every so often, I'd catch him watching me. Not judging, not mocking, just seeing. Like he could see the parts of me I'd spent years hiding. By noon, we'd made progress. The shed's frame was sturdier, but the roof was a mess. Jake handed me a rope to secure a loose beam, and I fumbled, the knot slipping. Here, he said, stepping close. Too close. His hands covered mine, guiding the rope, and I swear the air stopped moving. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was steady, deliberate. I didn't pull away. You're not from around here, are you? I asked, desperate to fill the silence before it swallowed me whole. He chuckled, a sound like gravel and warmth. Moved here last year. Needed a change. His eyes flicked to mine, and there it was, a flicker of something raw, something I recognized because it lived in me too. Loneliness, want, fear. I turned back to the rope, my hands shaking now. What did you run from? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Jake didn't answer right away. He tied the knot, his movements slow, then stepped back. Same thing you're running from, I reckon. My breath caught. He didn't know me, didn't know the nights I'd spent staring at the ceiling, wrestling with feelings I couldn't name. But the way he said it, like he'd seen my soul laid bare, made me want to bolt. Instead, I stayed. I hammered harder, each strike a plea to drown out the truth he'd just spoken. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of fire, Jake invited me inside for a beer. His kitchen was cluttered but warm, with mismatched mugs and a radio playing soft country. We sat at a scarred wooden table, and he talked about growing up in Alabama, about leaving after his family turned their backs. They didn't like who I am, he said, his voice steady but laced with old pain. So I built a life where I could be. I stared at my beer, the condensation pooling on the table. And who are you, Jake? He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto mine. Someone who's done hiding. The words hit like a punch. I wanted to ask more, to spill my own secrets, but fear clamped my mouth shut. Instead, I nodded, drained my beer, and left, promising to come back tomorrow. As I drove home, the night closing in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just stepped off a cliff. The next day, I was back at Jake's, hammer in hand, but my focus was shot. Every glance, every brush of his arm against mine, felt like a spark waiting to ignite. We were finishing the shed's roof when it happened. I was balancing on a ladder, tying down a tarp, when my foot slipped. Jake grabbed me, his hands strong on my waist, pulling me back. For a moment, we were frozen. His grip tight, my heart hammering, our faces inches apart. Careful, he murmured, but he didn't let go. His eyes searched mine, and I saw it again, that raw, unguarded want. My walls, the ones I'd built so carefully, cracked. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't want to. And then he kissed me. It was quick, fierce, like he'd been holding it back as long as I had. My world tilted, every fear and doubt drowned out by the warmth of his lips. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide, like he was as shocked as I was. Ethan, don't, I said, my voice rough. Don't say you're sorry. He wasn't. Neither was I. But as I stood there, the shed half fixed behind us, I knew nothing would be the same again. The air between us crackled, heavy with what we'd just done. Jake's hands lingered on my waist, and I didn't pull away, even though every instinct screamed to run. I'd spent my life dodging moments like this, but now, standing in his backyard with the Georgia heat pressing down, I was caught. I'm not sorry, Jake said, his voice low but firm, like he was staking a claim. His eyes held mine, daring me to step forward or bolt. I wanted both. My heart was a war zone, half of it begging to lean into him, the other half terrified of what it meant. Macon wasn't a place for men like us, not openly, not safely. I stepped back, my boots crunching on the gravel. I need to finish the roof, I muttered, turning to the ladder. It was a coward's move, and we both knew it. Jake didn't push, just handed me the tarp, his fingers brushing mine again. That touch was enough to make my skin burn. We worked until dusk, the silence thicker now, charged with unspoken words. I kept my eyes on the nails, the wood, anything but him. But I felt him, every movement, every glance. When we finally stopped, the shed was nearly done, but I was a mess. My hands shook as I packed my tools, and Jake's voice broke through. You coming back tomorrow? I nodded, not trusting my voice. As I drove home, the kiss replayed in my mind, a loop I couldn't stop. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a door I'd kicked open, and I didn't know what was on the other side. That night, I barely slept. My room, with its faded baseball posters and creaky bed, felt smaller than ever. I kept seeing Jake's face, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me. I kept feeling his hands, steady and sure. By morning, I was a wreck, but I went back. I had to. Jake was waiting by the shed, a thermos of coffee in hand. Thought you might need this, he said, offering it with a half smile. I took it, our fingers grazing, and that spark was back, brighter now. We finished the shed by noon, the roof patched, the walls solid. It was good work, but it felt like an afterthought. The real work was happening between us, in the glances we stole, the silences we didn't fill. After we sat on his porch, the air thick with summer, he told me more. About Alabama, about the brother who stopped speaking to him, about the nights he'd spent wondering if he'd ever find a place to belong. I thought Macon might be it, he said, staring at the wildflowers. But it's not the place, is it? It's the people. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. What if the people aren't ready for you? He looked at me, his gaze steady. Then you find the ones who are. I wanted to be one of those people. I wanted it so bad it hurt. But fear was a heavy chain, and I'd worn it too long. I don't know how to do this, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I've never. Me neither, he said. And there was that smile again, soft and real. Not like this. That afternoon, we didn't kiss again. We didn't need to. Something was building, slow and strong, like the shed we'd fixed. But Macon had eyes everywhere, and I felt them as I left his place. The neighbors' curtains twitched, and I wondered what they saw. A handyman finishing a job or something more. The next day, trouble found us. I was at Jake's, sanding down the shed's new door, when a truck roared into the driveway. A guy climbed out, broad-shouldered and red-faced, his eyes narrow as they landed on Jake. Harper, he spat, like the name tasted bad. Heard you been hiring help. Jake stiffened but kept his voice calm. Yeah, Ethan's fixing my shed. Problem. The guy, Travis, I later learned, a local with a reputation for trouble, sneered. Just wondering what else you're fixing. His eyes flicked to me, and I felt the accusation like a blade. My stomach twisted, but Jake stepped forward, his body a shield. Get off my property, Travis, he said, his tone ice-cold. Travis laughed, but it was hollow. Watch yourself, Harper. Folks talk. He climbed back into his truck and peeled out, leaving dust and dread in his wake. Jake turned to me, his jaw tight. You okay? I wasn't. My hands were shaking again, but not from want this time. What happens if he talks? I asked, my voice cracking. If everyone knows? Jake's eyes softened, but there was steel in them too. Then we deal with it. Together. I wanted to believe him, but Macon wasn't a place for together. Not for us. That night, I drove home with my heart in my throat, wondering if I was brave enough to find out what together could mean. Travis's visit left a shadow that clung to me. I woke the next morning with a knot in my chest. His sneer burned into my mind. Macon was small, and gossip was its currency. By now, Travis's words could be spreading like wildfire. I almost didn't go back to Jake's, but the thought of not seeing him hurt worse than the fear. When I pulled into his driveway, he was waiting, leaning against the shed we'd finished. The sight of him, blonde hair glinting in the sun, his t-shirt stretched across his shoulders, made my resolve waver. You came, he said, and there was relief in his voice, like he'd been holding his breath. Almost didn't, I admitted, climbing out of my truck. Travis, he's trouble. Jake's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He's a bully, always has been, but he doesn't get to decide who we are. I wanted to argue, to say that Travis could ruin us, that Macon would chew us up and spit us out. But Jake's eyes held mine, and for a moment, I believed him. We didn't work on the shed that day, it was done. Instead, we walked his property, the wildflowers brushing our knees. He told me about the life he wanted, simple, honest, with someone who didn't flinch at the truth. I listened, my heart aching with how much I wanted to be that someone. That afternoon, we ended up under the oak tree, the one from that first moment that felt like a lifetime ago. We sat close, our shoulders touching, and I let myself feel it, the warmth of him, the possibility. What's it like? I asked, my voice soft. Being out, not hiding. Jake looked at the horizon, his expression distant. Scary as hell at first, like jumping into cold water. But then it's freedom, Ethan. Even if it's messy. I thought about my dad, about the church I hadn't set foot in since I was 18, about the way people looked at me when I didn't fit their mold. What if I'm not ready for messy? He turned to me, his hand resting on mine. Then we go slow. But I'm not going anywhere. That night I stayed for dinner. Jake cooked. Steak and potatoes, nothing fancy, but it felt like a promise. We laughed, we talked, and for the first time, I let myself imagine a life where I didn't have to hide. But as I drove home, reality crept back. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Emily, Heard you're working for that Harper guy. Be careful, Ethan. People are talking. My stomach dropped. I didn't reply, but her words followed me into sleep, twisting my dreams into nightmares of pointing fingers and slamming doors. The next day, I went back to Jake's, but the air felt different. He was quieter, his eyes scanning the street like he was waiting for trouble. We didn't talk about Travis, but his presence lingered. We were cleaning up the yard, stacking leftover wood, when a car slowed by the house. I didn't recognize it, but Jake did. "That's Travis's buddy," he said, his voice tight. "They're circling." Fear clawed at me, but so did anger. I was tired of running, tired of hiding. "Let them circle," I said, surprising myself. Jake looked at me, a slow smile breaking through his tension. "That's the spirit." We kept working, but the day felt like a countdown. That evening, as we sat on the porch, Jake reached for my hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt huge, like a line we'd crossed together. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "Me too," he said, squeezing my hand. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe alone." Those words carried me through the night, but they couldn't stop what was coming. The next morning, I found my truck's tires slashed, a note tucked under the wiper. "Faggots don't belong here." The word hit like a fist, raw and ugly. I stood there, shaking, until Jake found me. He read the note, his face hardening, but he didn't let go of my hand. "We can't let them win," he said, his voice fierce. "Not like this." I nodded, but inside I was breaking. I'd spent my life trying to be invisible, and now I was exposed, raw, and terrified. But Jake's hand in mine was an anchor, and for the first time I didn't want to run. The note burned a hole in my pocket as I drove home, Jake's words echoing. "We can't let them win." But who was them? Travis? The town? The voice in my head that said I'd never be enough? I parked in my driveway, the slashed tires a reminder that this wasn't just talk anymore. This was real, and it was ugly. I didn't tell my family. My dad would have said I brought it on myself. My mom would have cried and prayed. Emily already knew too much, so I kept it to myself, patching the tires with money I didn't have and going back to Jake's the next day. He was waiting, his face bruised, not physically, but in the way his eyes carried worry. "You okay?" he asked, and I lied with a nod. We didn't work that day. Instead, we sat in his living room, the curtains drawn, like we could shut out the world. "We need to talk about this," Jake said, his voice steady but heavy. "They're not gonna stop." "I know," I said, my throat tight. "But what do we do? Leave?" Jake's eyes darkened. "I left Alabama because I had to. I'm not running again. Not unless you're with me." The words hit hard, not because they scared me, but because they didn't. I wanted to be with him wherever that led. But Macon was home, and leaving meant giving up the only life I'd ever known. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "My family, my work." "Your family doesn't see you," Jake said, not unkindly. "And your work? You're fixing everyone else's messes, Ethan. What about you?" I didn't have an answer. Instead, I leaned into him, my head on his shoulder, and for a moment, the world was quiet. But quiet didn't last. That afternoon, Travis and his crew came back. 3 trucks this time, parked across the street, their engines idling like a threat. Jake stood on the porch, arms crossed, while I stayed inside, my heart pounding. "They're just trying to scare us," Jake said when he came back in, but his voice shook, and I knew he was scared too. That night we made a plan, not to run, but to fight. Not with fists, but with truth. Jake had friends, people he'd met online, a small community of folks who'd been through this. They told us to document everything, the note, the tires, the trucks. "If they come for us," Jake said, "we'll have proof." The next day I went to the police. It was a risk. Macon's cops weren't known for being progressive, but I couldn't sit still. The officer, a guy I'd gone to high school with, took my statement but didn't meet my eyes. "We'll look into it," he said, and I knew he wouldn't. I left feeling smaller, but not defeated. Jake was waiting when I got back, and his hug felt like armor. Days passed, tense and quiet. The trucks didn't come back, but the feeling of being watched never left. Jake and I grew closer, our moments stolen in the safety of his house. A kiss in the kitchen, a laugh over coffee, a night spent tangled together on his couch. Each one was a rebellion, a middle finger to the hate outside. But hate doesn't sleep. A week later, I got a call from Emily. "Dad knows," she said, her voice trembling. "Someone saw you at Jake's. He's furious, Ethan. He's coming to talk to you." I felt the ground drop out. My dad wasn't a violent man, but his disappointment was worse than any fist. I went to Jake's, needing his strength. When I told him, he didn't flinch. "Let him come," he said. "You're not alone anymore." Dad showed up that evening, his face like stone. He didn't look at Jake, just at me. "You're throwing your life away," he said. "For what?" This is who I am," I said, my voice shaking but clear. Jake's hand found mine and I held on tight. Dad's eyes flicked to our hands, and for a moment, I saw pain, not anger. Then he turned and left without another word. I broke down after tears I'd held back for years. Jake held me, his arms steady, his voice soft. "You did it," he whispered. "You told the truth." But the truth came at a cost. The next day, my phone was silent, no jobs, no calls. Word had spread, and Macon was closing ranks. I was losing everything I'd known, but with Jake beside me, I wasn't sure I cared. The silence from my phone was deafening. By the end of the week, my clients, folks I'd worked for years, stopped calling. Macon had made its choice, and I wasn't part of it anymore. But Jake was, and that was enough to keep me going. We spent days together, building something new. Not a shed, but a life. It was fragile, built on hope and defiance, but it was ours. One night, under the oak tree, Jake pulled me close. "We could leave," he said, his voice soft but serious. "Start over somewhere else. Somewhere we don't have to hide." I thought about it. Leaving Macon, my family, the only home I'd ever known, scared me, but not as much as losing Jake. "Where would we go?" I asked. "Anywhere," he said, his smile bright in the moonlight. "As long as it's with you." We didn't decide that night, but the idea took root. We started planning, not just to run, but to build. Jake had savings and I had skills. We talked about a small house, maybe in a city where we could walk hand in hand without looking over our shoulders. Felt like a dream, but with him it was possible. Then Travis came back. It was a Sunday, the air thick with late summer heat. We were in Jake's yard, laughing over a bad attempt at grilling, when his truck roared up. This time he wasn't alone. 3 others, all men I recognized from town, their faces hard with hate. My heart sank, but Jake stepped forward, his body shielding mine. "Leave," Jake said, his voice like steel. "This is private property." Travis smirked, stepping closer. "You don't belong here, Harper. Neither does he." He pointed at me, and I felt the weight of their stares, heavy and accusing. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, but Jake's hand found mine, grounding me. "We're not going anywhere," I said, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. "You don't get to decide who belongs." The men laughed, but it was forced, uneasy. Travis took a step forward, but before he could say more, a car pulled up, Emily's. She climbed out, her face pale but determined. "Leave them alone, Travis," she said, her voice shaking but loud. "You don't speak for this town." I stared at her, shocked. She hadn't spoken to me since Dad's visit. But here she was, standing up for me, for us. Travis hesitated, his bravado faltering. The other men shifted, unsure. Emily didn't back down. "Go," she said, and to my surprise they did. After, she hugged me, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry I didn't get it before, she whispered. But I see you now, Ethan. I'm proud of you. That moment broke something in me. Not pain, but the last of my fear. Emily's support wasn't everything, but it was enough to remind me I wasn't alone. Jake and I stayed in Macon not because it was easy, but because it was ours to fight for. We faced whispers, glares, even more notes slipped under doors. But we faced them together. Months later, we moved. Not far, just to a neighboring town where the air felt lighter. Jake started a carpentry business, and I joined him, our hands working side by side. We built a home, not just walls and a roof, but a place where we could be us. My dad never came around, but Emily visited, bringing stories and hope. Macon didn't change overnight, but we did. We showed them love could be louder than hate. Under that same oak tree, now miles away, Jake proposed one evening, a simple ring in his calloused hand. I said yes, tears mixing with laughter, and we kissed, the world fading away. The shed we'd fixed was long behind us, but what we'd built together, trust, courage, love, was stronger than any storm. We weren't just fixing sheds anymore. We were fixing ourselves, and in doing so, we found a truth worth fighting for. Love doesn't just survive. It thrives, even in the hardest places. And that was a story worth telling.